So, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. If you are joining us on Friday night over on the Azurish Live Twitch.tv channel, thanks so much for tuning in. Please do take part in the chat below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a follow. You'll get notified next time we go live with more content for you. Equally, if you're watching on YouTube on Catch Up, huge thanks. Really appreciate you stopping by and saying hello. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you like it, of course, and leave some comments below. That would be absolutely awesome. Okay, so my next guest this week, she's a cloud advocate at Microsoft. Used to be a Microsoft MVP before that. She's a core team member of the 100 Days of Cloud, a co-host of the Cloud Code Live podcast, an incredible community content creator, as well as a huge inspiration to me personally. So I'm really excited to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With. It's GPS herself. It's Gwyneth Peña-Siguenza. Hi, Gwen. How you doing?
That was quite the introduction. I hope I live up to the expectations that you've now set to the...
It's got to be done, Gwen. I think I just saying to them before we hit record, it's just I'm surprised that I haven't invited you on for a chat before now because, there's a little bit of a backstory, I think, to what you've done for me personally over the years. And I know this is the first time we've properly spoken other than on instant messages across the socials. So really happy, thanks for joining me. Really happy to have you on as a guest this week, Gwen. So, before we get stuck into our little chat around a few areas, I'd be surprised if there's not many people that don't know who you are, but I don't know if you want to give yourself a little bit of an intro.
Sure. My name is Gwyn. On social media, I go by GPS just because it's my initials and it's sort of catchy, I guess, for that whole concept of a personal brand or whatever. I'm now a cloud advocate at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for over a month now. Prior to that, I was at a Cloud Guru doing a lot of community content stuff. And I've had a YouTube channel around, I guess, cloud computing and my career in cloud computing and different things that I wanted to create tutorials on for about a year and a half now. I was an Azure MVP up until I joined Microsoft. And yeah, I like to just describe myself as someone who works in the cloud space and kind of worked her way up into the role that I am now. And I like making videos and I like talking to people. So thank you for this invite. Just try to share the knowledge that I wish I had when I was getting into the field. I guess that's me.
Absolutely. And I think, as I alluded to there just before we started to record, me personally, when I first turned to the community, it was one of those things that for years, I'm of probably the slightly older generation. So I've done a little bit of time working in IT, not huge amount of years in cloud. You could probably talk about sort of 4, maybe 5 years focused on cloud platforms per se, now. But when I kind of turned to community during this COVID lockdown, it was a case of, right, okay, what is community? Where do you start? What do you do in community? And in fact, it was one of your videos that actually kind of triggered me into kind of having that little bit of focus to try and do something. I don't know what that something was going to be, but It was the video you did with the 100 Days of Cloud Challenge with Scott Hanselman, probably around about a year ago now since you did that.
Yeah, that's right.
Can we start there with if that's all right with you, with the 100 Days of Cloud? How did you get into that? How did that come about for you, and what did it mean for you at the time, Gwen?
Yeah, I believe I was first involved in that back in I want to say around when quarantine started here, and I'm in the East Coast of the US. So that was probably like April of last year. There were a couple of the core team members already sort of together, and then they'd reach out to me and they mentioned this is what we're building. We're trying to sort of put together like challenges and information for other people who want to get into cloud. And since I had my sort of building my YouTube channel, it was like very aligned with what I wanted to do. So, I joined them, and then we started working on just developing like a GitHub repo around ideas and projects that people could build to develop their cloud skills. And these 100 days challenges, these hashtags that you see on social media are quite popular. There's 100 days of code, 100 days of no code, 100 days of serverless, 100 days of cloud, 100 days of like you name it, it's out there. It's a nice little I guess social media thing to hold you accountable. There's also the Discord for 100 days where there's I don't know how many there are now. I'm not as active now as I used to be, but we can talk about that a little later. But yeah, it's just like joining thing. I mean, and some of my closest friends now, Rishab and Antonio, I met them through the 100 Days of Cloud, and even after like I sort of like took a step away from them, we've still remained close, and we have like current projects that we're working on still in like cloud content space.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and we'll probably talk a little bit around those as well in a second. But I mean, for the 100 Days of Cloud, I think when somebody's turning their attention to maybe doing a little bit more of this kind of public facing and public learning, and just kind of creating content and putting something back out to the community, I think I'd like to chat to you around that and kind of get your take on it, because I think when I started to do that, I had no real clear vision as to almost why. Well, I kind of knew why I wanted to do it, but I didn't know where it was going to go. So I just want to try and bounce off you and to see where your thoughts were at the time. So we're in a hugely fast pace of change in industry at the moment in terms of tech and cloud compute. Whichever way you look and turn, there's a gazillion things that you could learn, and probably even more ways that you could turn in terms of your specialisms, what you look at. But at the same time, there's lots of overlapping and interlinking with these technologies that we're all learning. So almost like the traditional boundaries that I guess I was accustomed to had been really blurred, in terms of it was no longer about just being that segregated networking person or that segregated compute or storage. It was all cloud is all, well, you kind of need to know a little bit about everything now. So I kind of knew that there was a lot of areas that I probably needed to gem my own knowledge up in terms of cloud compute. So that was one of the main reasons that I kind of turned to public learning, was that I thought, well, if I was to do this learning in public, could it help people in my position that are, if you like, time served or whatever you want to call it, been in the industry a long time, but knew clearly there was a whole set of skills that we all had to learn. So whether or not you were new to the industry or you'd spent 10 years in the industry, to me, that was completely irrelevant at the time. It was all of these skills were now and very valid now. And how did you find how do you find your way through the forest of these new skills? So that was a lot of preamble there, Gwen. But I mean, hopefully it sets the scene as to why I got into 100 Days of Cloud. But do you see it in the same way? And how would you what would you say to somebody that's coming into cloud for the first time with how to kind of orientate yourself around all of these different and new technologies? What would your take on that be?
I think, as many new cloud services that come out all the time, that's always going to be a thing. There's going to be a new name. There's going to be a new theme. At the end of the day, there's always sort of these 4 pillars that I consider like the fundamentals that probably won't go away anytime soon in terms of building like a solid foundation to get into cloud computing. And we all know that the cloud are just Linux servers. So, having your basics of networking, Linux administration, some programming skills, like you're not building you could, but I wouldn't say it's like at the core of cloud, like building like software development or software engineering, but understanding how to utilize, the terminal and CLIs and commands and scripting things and automating things, because you're only as valuable as your automation skills really when it comes to cloud computing. And some DevOps practices, probably the most popular ones like CI/CD, version control. Oh my goodness, I almost forgot.
Yeah,
Git,
absolutely.
Git and and then obviously understanding how to utilize a cloud platform, but not through the portal like you should be doing, or the console. You should be doing things via CLI and like commands and code. And I think if you can spend like your beginning assuming you have some sort of technical background. If you're starting from complete scratch, that's a little different. But I would say you're switching from some sort of tech area to cloud. You can spend your beginning just focusing on that. And there's other amazing parts of cloud. Like we've got serverless, we've got containers, we've got like more in-depth DevOps practices and services and all those things like that. But if you can spend like a good chunk of your your time as a beginner in those, say, pillars, I think you're setting yourself up for success. That's pretty much what I give as advice to people who are trying to like come into the space. I have a GitHub repo, like the self-taught guide to cloud computing, that it like took a week, and I recruited Rishab to help me out to write that. And we have like a markdown file for each phase. We call them 4 phases. We got like projects and resources and sort of things you should be able to check off at the end of each phase. Sort of like a guided learning for people. I typically point them there. Yeah, but like you mentioned, that's like the cloud is just like a collection of small chunks of many different IT areas. So it can be a little overwhelming, but I guess it's a great area for us generalists that we like to sort of poke around and everything.
Yeah, and I was speaking to somebody not long ago around this whole concept of becoming a being a generalist in tech. Is very much one of those things that I don't know about you, but in my experience, people have kind of looked at to go, okay, you're a bit of a jack of all trades, and you don't really know a lot about something. And I think, well, okay, but at the same time, it's like this whole concept of kind of, digging down into a specialist area or maybe one or two specialist areas, but having that broad knowledge across a cloud platform, I think is really key to understanding cloud. And that's what I try to use 100 Days of Cloud to kind of build my own knowledge up, is to look into all of those different, you mentioned a few then, things like containers, Kubernetes, DevOps to a certain extent. CI/CD was completely new to me. A few years ago, I first heard it. It was like, yeah, that's more software development. I'm kind of in operations and infra. And then you hear all these terms like infrastructure as code. And yes, you can build this using CI/CD. And it's like, well, maybe I should learn about these things and understand. So, yeah, so the key thing I think you mentioned then is automation, your automation skills. And I think that applies across the board, doesn't it, in terms of whatever your job is in tech. If you can kind of automate it, then you're almost onto a winner.
Absolutely.
In terms of how you actually automate things, so you mentioned CI/CD, things like that, and serverless technologies. I mean, have you got any areas in serverless compute, maybe on the Azure platform, that might help people to look at in terms of trying to understand in how they might get started with some of these serverless technologies? What is a serverless technology, and why should somebody get involved with them in the first place?
Of course. So this concept of serverless is sort of a set of many different areas or subsets, and really the only thing is that you're spending less time provisioning and managing infrastructure, because those responsibilities are on the platform, whether that be Azure or AWS or GCP or whichever cloud you select. There's serverless databases, there's serverless storage, serverless messaging. The most popular is probably FAST, function as a service. You have things like AWS Lambda, Azure Functions. Google Cloud has, I think they're called Cloud Functions or Cloud Run, something like that. Yeah, and I try to encourage people to at least get a little hands-on with FAST. These snippets of code that you can utilize to like automate the most simplest to probably the most complex like workflows that you have out there. And also, like, you can automate your own infrastructure, you can automate notifications for yourself, like so many things. And it's pretty, I want to say straightforward, but I think once you get a grasp from it, it's pretty simple to sort of tie all other cloud aspects or services in the context of serverless. So that's like what I sort of do now. Like, I'm very much a generalist in cloud computing, but whenever I need to learn something, I sort of like pair it with how would it work with serverless, because that's where I sort of go more into depth. It's like the T-shaped kind of thing. It's like the I think it's called T-shaped knowledge or T-shaped skills, where it's like one, like the letter T, it's all like that, and then there's just one area that you go deeper into. Like serverless would be that one specific area for me.
Yeah.
And And it could be like straightforward things like have an Azure function send you your how much you spent that month as a text message or as an email, things like that, right? I know Jeff Holland on the Azure Functions team had something that would run through his infrastructure and check if there are any like virtual machines running, and like send him like, hey, do you want to like remove this infrastructure in a text? And he could just reply with yes or no, and it would remove the VMs,
Okay.
things like that. Those are quite neat. Yeah, just exploring those fun little things. I think it's also an area where if you're interested in sort of software engineering, but not to the extent of like developing, full on desktop apps or web apps or things like that, or mobile apps, but you do
Mhm.
want to get more sort of in the nitty gritty of code than automation. I think serverless is also like a nice middle ground, because you definitely have to leverage a cloud platform and code, but it's sort of in that area where it's like you're not doing like traditional software engineering, and you're also not
Sure.
managing infrastructure, that kind of area.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I have also my YouTube channel is almost the first year of the content I made was all around Azure Functions. So if you want to get hands on, I have like plenty of videos there you can follow. I have sort of these 10-minute or less tutorials on there that you can follow to learn more about Azure Functions. I don't really have great recommendations for AWS Lambda because I'm not too familiar with the service, but I'm sure there's good stuff out there.
Oh no, absolutely, and I've seen some of those videos, Gwen. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool when you do learn, or you're looking to learn about something, that you can just dig in, stick it into YouTube video, upload, and now you're helping a lot of other people try and understand the bit that you've just learned for yourself. And
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a really cool concept in terms of what serverless actually offers businesses. And one of the things I guess I've struggled with over the last year or so is kind of, I come from that traditional operations background, so pretty
Hmm.
much it's not a software development background, but it's things that are up and they're up and running, keep things fed and watered and maintained and running properly. And I suppose it's a little bit of fear to a certain extent with things like serverless and this
Hmm.
kind of this event-driven ecosystem of different platforms, different PaaS services. My understanding is that with things like Azure Functions or any other kind of cloud platforms equivalent, they're
Hmm.
almost like those little snippets of code that you can use to, if you're in an infrastructure or an ops position, you can use them, like you say, to glue other parts of your infrastructure together, or to alert, or to signal, or to do something over there.
Correct.
Am I right in thinking along those lines, Gwen?
Yeah, but I think also the cool thing is you can make it as big and as small as you want it to be. Like I've created things with Azure Functions that were more add-ons to existing solutions, or things that sort of were more acting like a middleman versus a full-on solution. But I've also created like full-on solutions straight from Azure Functions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can, it's like quite flexible, right? And the amount of code and the amount of services that you connect to your functions as a service is really up to you. It can be as big as small as you want. And it's great for experimenting. It's also great for putting together like real production applications.
So, I mean, in with Azure Functions, we can use various different programming languages. I'm assuming. So, as somebody that's come from a very heavy PowerShell background,
Hmm.
potentially I can use functions to run my PowerShell, my snippets of code.
Absolutely. I think it's
Yeah.
C Sharp, F Sharp, PowerShell, JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, Python. I think I got them all. We might be missing one, but yeah, we despite I guess the reputation, we do uh support more than C Sharp and F
Yeah.
Sharp at here at Azure. So yeah.
No, and it's cool to see, because it's almost like I've been on a little journey, not a huge journey, with trying to make use of things like serverless functions and other parts of the serverless product set, even the low code no code type stuff with the Power Platform.
Yeah.
And
Very cool.
yeah, I mean, it's just mind blowing that all of a sudden now you've got this platform that, look, to a lot of extent, that the first several thousand operations that you run of these functions, sometimes they're free.
Hmm.
They got a free tier, haven't they, where you can kind of run these things,
Yeah.
and effectively you're not being charged for them, which is kind of cool to kind of knock down that barrier to entry to start
Yeah.
trying to do some of that kind of work. Now, one of the areas that kind of inspired me to try and do a little bit more of this learning myself was that, you know, I sat in a pool of people within my own job where we you know, the nicest way to say it, well, it's probably not the nicest way to say it, but the reality is we're dinosaurs. You know, we are very much stuck in that traditional on-prem, you know, tin network, like I say, storage, and we're moving into this cloud world where you can kind of almost to a certain extent forget about that. And sometimes it's hard for people to forget about that way of being. And I just wanted to kind of get your feeling for, you know, people in that kind of mindset, taking the shift to a cloud way of working. You know, you mentioned that there were the four key areas for maybe people coming into the industry new or fresh to cloud technologies. Would they still hold true, in your opinion, now for maybe the older generation coming into learning cloud technologies now, or, you know, would you point them in any other directions?
In terms of their technical skill set, I wouldn't really point them anywhere else. The cool thing about cloud and how, you know, large and it is, you know, there's something for everyone, I think, and, you know, leveraging your existing knowledge. Like if you're, you know, networking expert, if you're a storage expert, if you're I don't know, automation expert, you name it, there's cloud for that. There's cloud engineer, cloud administrator, cloud developer, cloud, you know, anything, put cloud in front of it, and I'm sure it exists out there. So leveraging your own, and, you know, what you already like, what you already do in the cloud it's there. You know, you'll have to learn, you know, new syntax, service names, how to access things, and kind of get out of the on-prem mindset and like, oh, okay, now I just have to go here to figure these things out. But yeah, I would say, yeah, in terms of your skill set, I wouldn't really tell you to go anywhere else, especially if this is something you're looking into. I would probably encourage these people, and only because this is like from my experience, working with, I guess, people who were sort of that, like, very like stuck on-prem is what we're doing, and, you know, even if they didn't have a valid reason, like that was their opinion and mindset, is that they were very closed off to sort of like new developers or new engineers or new you know, new people coming onto the team and sort of giving ideas. And I know I encountered that a lot. Like I had started implementing solutions with functions and logic apps, which is part of the Power Platform. So we're talking about low code and no code solutions. And at that role, I was seen upon like, oh, like, yeah, that's cute, or like, yeah, that's fun. It's good for like a internal development tool, things like that. But it's never going to be like this full on solution or full like production ready kind of thing. Like, or yeah, it's not necessarily useful. So I would think more of like, if like the part of who you are as a professional, you might want to like reconsider that mindset, just because, you know, we should be working towards being a welcoming to all kind of people. And I have seen that where it's like, you know, you bring something new to the table and some people can get a little defensive about that. But yeah, but in terms of your technical skill set, there's something in the cloud for everyone. So more than welcome.
I mean, to be honest, I was struggling to get out my point there when I was trying to explain that, but you kind of hit the nail on the head. And I think I face some of those challenges as well when you're looking at some of the newer technologies. It's very much, and I'm trying to work out what it is. You know, is it down to people just basically being stuck in their ways? Are people worried about having to put in the effort to learn new skills and new technologies to kind of keep their own job safe to a certain extent? I mean, what's your take on that? Is, you know, do you think there's some of those elements that are playing into that kind of mindset with people?
Probably. I'm trying to remember if I have like a specific situation where it's happened where someone was sort of like protecting their like I guess their job security or things like that, right? And I'm sure to some extent that is a thing. I don't feel like it's ever justified, because, you know, the more value you bring, it just means that you're capable of, like, you know, doing something and learning something and providing something. Like, there's always something new that you can pick up and become skilled at. So I don't really understand that issue, but you know, who am I to judge people's like personal decisions and stuff like that?
It's one of those things. I suppose it's my when I speak to customers now, it's about, for me, it's about gluing solutions together. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the big problems I'm faced with is finding people with the skills that you need today to do
Mm-hmm.
some of this work. I think it harps onto, people talk about a skill shortage, where, I don't know, is it a skill shortage, or is it just people not skilled in the specific thing? We've probably got plenty of people that are capable of doing this kind of work, but
Yeah.
aren't necessarily focused on it. So it's almost like trying to find people with the various skills. And at the moment, for me, it's almost like you've got pockets of really clever, really brilliantly creative people that are able to put these solutions together.
Mm-hmm.
But then you ship them into a production environment with a customer, and this is a massive overgeneralization. I think back to your point there, where you said that people have said to you, "Oh, that's very cute. That's not going to live in production." They're the
Yeah.
kind of things I've come up with. Is like all of a sudden now, when you've got not just maybe people like us that are doing a little bit of public learning and trying to keep on top of these technologies, as well as the people that aren't public facing doing it in a technical world, you've then got this
Mm-hmm.
level of customers working for businesses that
Mm-hmm.
maybe their infrastructure and their platforms is sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years behind the cutting edge of today.
Right.
So, I'm faced with that conversation of trying to help those customers come to the knowledge of, look, this is where you could be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like a journey they've got to go through to kind of mature their own estate, not just technically their infrastructure and knowledge internally, but their own skill level, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those battles I've had. How do you, is there that niche killer thing that you can show somebody to go, this is why you want to go to cloud? This is what, you know what I mean? And I suppose with serverless technologies, that could, like you said earlier on, that could almost be that little hook to some businesses, maybe with, solving business problems between legacy applications and things like that, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, the way I see it is businesses, they care about like what's going to save me money, right? When I encountered that issue with say colleagues being like, oh yeah, that's cute, like functions, yeah, cute, but like in production kind of thing. That was like the first thing that I'd automated. Then after having a couple projects under my belt, I built something that saved the company like 20 hours of like manual tasks a week.
Yeah.
And that was easy to quantify and like how much money they're saving, and the whole solution ran under 30 cents a month. So I was able to bring to them like, look, this is what you're actually spending versus what you were spending before. This is what you're spending now. And I sort of built like a couple of tools around the solution to make them actually to be able to work with the solution long term, even after once I left the position. And I feel like when you can equate those things to, hey, I'm going to work with this. Let me give it a try, because if it works out, it's going to save you this much money. It's a lot easier to approach those conversations. And then once that happened, it became like full circle, where the engineering team started like respect my skill set, like, oh, you actually built something, that kind of thing, right? I mean, businesses want to save money. I don't think you'll ever hear a client, unless they're very, very technical, like to talk about like, I want you to use Python instead of Go, or I want you to use, I don't really think, right? If you can, become confident in what you're presenting and the benefits, and obviously you build something that's legit and not like, you're just selling them what did they say, like snake oil.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Selling the dream and not delivering anything.
Yeah, and to an extent, I think that is why I sort of got into building, I guess, my portfolio online with all this content and sharing my knowledge and things like that. Because, when people see you speak a certain way about things, or see you demoing things that you know about, they become more confident because they see that, oh, you know what you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So that also helps too, like being educated on the topic that you want to bring up, or the tech that you want to bring up. Goes a long way with getting people to sort of buy into what you want to use.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's right. I mean, I suppose it takes you on to another skill area, what you just kind of mentioned there, Gwen, in terms of you're kind of having to dig under the hood with, any business. Okay, if you're doing it for an internally developed application, whatever it might be, you're doing something. And I mean, in my experience, those kind of applications are kind of done, on the side in your spare time, when you've not got customer calls because paid work rules, all that kind of stuff. But
absolutely,
when it comes to, actually doing these things for real with business, it's trying to find that kind of proof of concept that is going to say that? And do you find you need to understand the business that you're working with or for at that point then, Gwyn? Is it a case that it's no longer about just your technical skills? You now need the skills to understand business operations. Why are we trying to do this thing that we're trying to automate?
If we take it a step higher, it's the ability to have a non-technical conversation with someone, because oftentimes these people who make the decisions as like, yeah, we'll have you do this work for us, or hey, we need this done, they're not very technical, which is also a skill sort of that I've developed with like creating content. So I did consult after leaving my cloud engineering gig and then joining a cloud guru. I did some consulting for a couple months there, and that's when I realized, like, again, people don't really care what you use. I mean, to an extent, like most people would be like, oh, I already have my infrastructure in Azure. I'd like to stay in Azure, but what you do there, it doesn't really matter as long as, I don't want you like bringing like AWS services or like that, like multi-cloud kind of thing. That was really the only sort of like opposition that I had found in terms of like what you could use. But yeah, really being able to sit down and like get to the details of what they want and what they need. And oftentimes, those, I could build something with, say, Logic Apps or something with some no-code, low-code solution. And what they wanted was like a full-blown thing with like 2 different servers or 3 different servers just for compute and that kind of stuff. And like, no, once we get to the nitty-gritty of what you're actually looking for, and we talk through this, like, oh, this could probably work for you as well, like just as well, right? Again, it comes down to like, hey, how much is it going to cost me, and can we find a way that this costs me less? And being able to have that conversation with them.
It's certainly a cool area, and it's certainly one that I need to learn a lot more of, because I think you're right to kind of be intrigued with it. I think from my point of view, it's definitely a fantastic set of tools. Yes, there's probably for people in the industry, look, there's different ways of working. If you're not into programming or coding, you're probably going to want to dip into that a little bit. It's kind of the point to a certain extent, I would say.
Yeah.
Just to know something, even the basics of a programming language, that even if you can copy some kind of scripts from, wherever it may be that you're getting them from, just to be able to kind of work your way through certain things to understand what you're doing. But I guess that's where the low-code, no-code stuff comes in. And I mean, from what I've seen, you've got connectors that you can hook into various different SaaS and PaaS applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think we sort of have this mindset in the industry where our value as engineers is directly associated with the number of lines of code that we provide, right? So the more code we can do, the more valuable we become. But for me, and my mindset has always been like, if I can spend less time implementing a solution or less code implementing a solution that's just as good, why would I not opt for that, right? If Logic Apps or Azure Functions can get it done in a day's worth of work versus going towards a more traditional thing that may take me, I don't know, 2 weeks or a month, or may take a team to get done, like why wouldn't we opt for that one, for the one that's going to be easiest? So there's a lot of, and not just specific to low code, no code, or serverless. Like there are a lot of services out there that abstract a lot of things that we don't necessarily have to worry about, and that'll be on the platform to take care of it, and then we can just focus on the business logic, wherever that may be, right? But yeah, just understand, and then that, I guess that circles back to like, if you have a good understanding of the platform itself, not in depth, but like, oh, for this sort of solution, I would go towards this service, or that kind of, you're looking for this one, I would go towards that other service. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in any one of them, but just to know what tools you have in your tool belt, that really makes you quite the efficient, but also like people are going to look to you like, oh, you're like my go-to person to figure out what I should use to build this thing, or what are our different options.
No, that's cool. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, no, it's cool to see. So, yeah, I think it's an area I need to look into a bit more. Just another area to look into, eh? Like I haven't got enough already. Gwyn, if we can change track slightly now and talk about your career. So you've, obviously over the last year or so, I mean, can you talk us through the kind of decisions that you've made up to this point now where you've actually gone over to work with Microsoft? That would be cool to understand.
Yeah, I was when I started my YouTube channel, I was a cloud engineer at I guess it's not necessarily startup. It was like a mid-sized company. I think it was about 50 employees at the time, and I was sort of like their only cloud, like dedicated cloud resource. Like they had other people who would do some projects in our Azure environment, but I was the one who was like, my day to day was just spending time in there. I actually became a cloud engineer there from a sys. So I was hired as like a junior sysadmin, kind of like it was like a very, very general position. But I knew I wanted to work in cloud, and the job description for that sysadmin role said like you'd have the opportunity to work in cloud if you want to, or DevOps related projects if you wanted to. So I took it. And yeah, I gained sort of like the respect and the trust of my boss, and I was like working overtime, working weekends, whatever it had to do to like be able to be put on these cloud projects. So then eventually becoming like getting promoted to cloud engineer, since I was the only sort of resource, like dedicated resource. A lot of like the back and forth that you would have with a team, like, you know, fellow software, there was like a big software engineering team and a big data team. Like they would have meetings to go back and forth on solutions. Whereas like the cloud stuff, it was like myself and then my boss was also in charge of another team that was a little bit more important. Well, I say more important because again, their solution directly converted into client dollars, whereas like if you're taking care of the cloud infrastructure, it's a little bit harder to like relate that to direct client, like how much the client's paying you for like one virtual machine. You don't really have that conversion there. Yeah, so it was just me, and then I kind of needed to find a way to document things as I was learning, because I was learning all these things kind of on the job. That was like it was really good luck that I was able to find a job where they were like, hey, just go figure it out. Really, like if you get stuck, if you blow something up, let us know. But if you can figure it out on your own, perfect. Like any books that I needed, any courses that I needed, certifications I want to get paid for, they were willing to do that. If there were conferences that I wanted to go to, they were willing to give me the time and like the money, even though I'm not really a big conference person, but that might change once this whole COVID thing is over, but who knows when that'll be. But anyway, I started the YouTube channel. I started sharing it just on social media, but back then I had maybe like, I don't know, 15 Twitter followers, and you know, I would share it on Twitter, Reddit, and then obviously be on YouTube. But yeah, the intention was never to sort of grow it into what it is now, or for it to lead me to where I am now. It was really just sharing things. And as things picked up, I started to realize that I enjoyed more coming home and making videos and, you know, sort of putting together these scripts and these small demos and the actual engineering itself. Like the engineering was really cool, but the cool part was like figuring out how these things worked. But I didn't necessarily have too much interest in building like the full-on solutions or having the meetings about like, you know, what things we have to like figure out, or like customer meetings or things like that. I wasn't necessarily interested in that. I just really liked playing around with these services, figuring out how they work, maybe building a small like, YouTube video, and then moving on to the next thing for me. And then and I think it was around, so that probably was like March last year, and around July I had realized like I'm sort of like done with my cloud engineering gig. And then I put my 2 weeks in, and then I got invited to Azure Friday with Scott Hanselman, which you mentioned this at the beginning of the chat. I also was awarded Azure MVP around that time too. And I think I had a conversation around then with Mike from Cloud Skills, and then with the folks at Skylines Academy too. So I think it was with Gregor and I can't remember the other person's. But anyway, it was like, just a bunch of conversations with these already existing like community members and things like that. So that was great. And because of that, and sort of like my YouTube channel, like having like my first, I guess, viral video in the community was me talking about, I think, how I got into cloud computing. Like it's like my most popular video now, but that like sort of blew up, and that's what Scott Hanselman found, and then he invited me on. But anyway, there's like I guess a lot of like buzz around myself, so I was also getting a lot of like consulting opportunities. People would be like, hey, we have this sort of Azure project, can you let us know, like if you know, just hop on a call, we'll talk about it, that kind of stuff. And build out. It was a lot more like administration and infrastructure focused than like developer focused, the things that I was getting. But I was like, all right, let me give this a try, let's see where it goes. I had wanted to sort of find a more like cloud content focused role. At that time, I knew what advocacy was, but I didn't necessarily think it was something that I could ever do, because I knew I would only want to do it at Microsoft. And I'm a college dropout. I don't necessarily have like the most prestige credentials or resume or anything like that. So I was like, I guess I'll just like, you know, keep it in the back of my mind, but you know, I'll just keep doing my thing now. yeah, and I just kind of like kept making videos, kept being on Twitter and social media, talking with people. I kept working with the people at 100 Days of Cloud. I kept consulting kind of things, and then the opportunity to join A Cloud Guru happened back. It was like October around that time. I think I initially thought about joining them in July, but then I figured like, I'm gonna look into other things first. And then the talk kind of came back up again around October or November, something around then. And then I ended up joining them at the end of last year, so December of last year.
And that was to do training content videos with a cloud guru, yeah?
Yeah, it was not necessarily like training. It was more like YouTube content, YouTube focused content. So these 10-minute tutorials on like, here's how to use this command, or here's how to access the Cloud Shell in Azure, or here's some Azure news or things like that, right? Not anything specific to like certifications or full-on courses, just sort of like short form content. Like they called it community training architect. So it was like more of like the free stuff that you would typically see more on social media or YouTube and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was cool. That was sort of like my first role as like a proper content person. In May, I think it was May. Yeah, April. My Rishab sends me the job descriptions to the role that I have now, and he says that he was interested in going for it, and he says, do you have anyone that I could sort of like ask questions about this? And I was like, I had met over my sort of year of like creating content in the Azure space. I'd met a couple of the advocates and become close to some of them. So I reached out to my friend, and then I think he might have like misunderstood. I think he thought I wanted to go interview for the role, and I had no interest in interviewing for it. So he said, I put a recommendation in, and then I'm going to have my manager talk to the hiring manager of that role. So just go ahead and apply for it. And I was like, no, I just reached out to you just to ask like questions. Cause like my friend wanted to like apply for it. Like he wanted to know more about the role. So then I remember saying, all right, I guess let's see what happens. Right. And then I get sort of invited to have like just a conversation about the role with the hiring manager to make sure it was a good fit, because with like, I guess any role, but when you think about these big companies, like they're putting a lot of money into the interviewing process because they have like a lot of people that apply to these jobs, of course. So they want to make sure you're not wasting your time, but they're not wasting their time. So they invited me to just have like a conversation about the role. And I remember after that first conversation, I said to myself, like, this is like everything. This is not only is this something that I want to do as a career, I also already do it for free, right? I had already been creating the content. I had already been doing like the community outreach, but just like on my own. So it seemed like sort of like a natural transition, also as being like an MVP. I knew a lot of folks at Microsoft. And then the interview process was like maybe like 3 weeks long ish. And then, I joined them in June. And that's kind of what I've been doing now, like prepping my first talks as an advocate. I'm sort of focused on serverless at the moment. So those are going to be next week, the first one. And then every month I'm just going to try to like find another pocket, I guess, that I can focus on and bring value to the community as an advocate.
So is that so? I mean, that's cool to hear. So yeah. I mean, obviously, being an outsider to Microsoft and looking in, you see that there's advocates right across the space, right across the entire Microsoft ecosystem. So are you tasked now with specific areas, Gwyn, or you said you were a generalist? So do you get to pick and choose the areas? How does that work now with your role with Microsoft?
Yeah, so I'm a regional cloud advocate, and my region is New York City. So we have regional advocates for every reactor. Are you familiar with the Microsoft reactors?
Yeah, I've seen a few of the reactors. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very cool. Except the New York City one is probably not as cool as like some of the other ones. Some of these other ones are like, especially the ones in like I think San Francisco is so cool. But anyway, we have these reactors in these regions, and we now have advocates for we're hiring advocates for each one. And I'm in the New York City area. So my goal is to be the balance between what, the product and the engineering things that we want to sort of showcase, and then what people in the area and the region want, and then what I want to talk about too. So there's like kind of like that balance where like how can I provide value, but also make sure it's something that I want to talk about. Like I don't want to talk about something that's like complete, like I've never used, I've never explored, I have no interest in things like that, right? So yeah, it's it's interesting finding the balance of like which areas that I want to talk about at the moment. Wouldn't say I have like a specialty. There are advocates that are specific to, say, the Python language or the JavaScript SDKs or things specific like that. For me, it's more as bringing to the region what the region wants, but also making sure it's aligned with what we want to share and showcase and what I want to share and showcase as well. Because part of providing sort of this content, these experiences and things like that is the authenticity, the actual interest that you show. Cause you don't want to be on like, if you think of your old school like webinar, someone just has like a 50 slide deck, 50-page slide deck, and they're just monotone the entire time. Like, what value is anyone getting out of that? So there's that careful balance of like, which tech do you want to explore? Which tech do we want to showcase? And what do people actually want? A lot of that is just being like, feet on the ground or ear to the, what's the saying when you have your ear like around everywhere and
ear on the grapevine, isn't it? Something like that.
Something like that. You're always in the know and always, being on what people are talking about and on these threads and things like that. So I don't really have like a specialty, and I think that's for me that's perfect. Like I was telling you, like the T-shaped things. The only reason I'm starting with serverless now, it's because it's like sort of to get going on, with a new role, and you have like so many things to figure out. Like the easiest thing in terms of technical, like the technical aspect for me is like serverless, just because I've had years of experience with it.
Go with what you know, sort of thing.
Yeah, but I'm very interested to bring my I guess my skills or my expertise as a content creator to areas that I haven't necessarily explored as much, and seeing what that type of content and those type of events look like. Also very excited for the in-person things. That's the coolest part of like my specific role as a regional advocate is like when the New York City reactors open again, and when everything's safe again, we're going to be having these in-person and these hybrid events, right? So not only are we going to be able to go back in person and have sort of more of these intimate, smaller, I guess, conferences or events, but we'll also be live streaming those kind of things. So it'll be cool to see how like that plays out. But yeah, again, there's no like focus. It's not like when you have to be like the Azure Functions person for the time that you're here at Microsoft.
It's like you say that's got to be a dream come true, surely. I mean, I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying now, and it's like the way that you're describing it. It's like you're in a pretty influential position between the community, between the people that are using this tech, and between the product groups within Microsoft. You're there helping the dots to get joined between those two functions, essentially, and you're kind of helping shape the future of how this tech is used in business, I presume.
Yeah, it's definitely like a two-way thing, whereas like I'm bringing you what we've built, showcasing what we've built, but I also want to know if you find this useful, what kind of issues have you encountered, what kind of things do you enjoy, or like really anything, like because the feedback is both ways kind of thing. And yeah, I would say I love it. For the month that I've been here, of course, the honeymoon stage of any job is there, but for me, it's definitely a dream come true. I think I once said this on a video or something that I did, that Microsoft was the only company, like the only like large company that I would have ever considered working at, because I very much like big mid-sized to small companies and that kind of like team rapport and balance that you get there. But yeah, Microsoft was the only place that I was willing to sort of try out for. And it worked out. I think advocacy is also kind of not necessarily new, but going through a shift where we're all still trying to figure out what it is. I think when I say we, I don't mean anyone specific. I just think advocacy in general across all companies. It's like everyone implements it in a different way. So I'm generally just want to be as useful as I can for both the team building the product, but also the people who use it.
Yeah, and it's a cool that really is, I guess it's not Not to everybody's taste, I'm sure, but I mean, yeah, I'm listening to what you're saying now, and it's definitely one of those roles where you think, you can show your enthusiasm for the role, for the tech, for your own creativity, I guess, as well. And I guess it's those various different aspects of the role that kind of make it, what it is, I guess. So no, I mean, it's cool to hear. It's really cool to hear, Gwen. And congratulations, obviously, for getting to that point, because
thank you.
I'm sure you're gonna have some fun in the role, no doubt, going forward.
Absolutely. I would say I think if you're like someone who's very interested in just the engineering aspect, and there's advocacy or an advocate on your team or someone that you're close with, I would encourage you to sort of reach out to that person, or if there's something that you can collaborate with them on, because being in a role that you are directly in touch with the community like advocates are, it's quite, it's interesting because it's like a very different skill set. We are, engineers, of course, but we just spend less time focus on one specific product. We were building like demos and talks around like a bunch of like different things, and depending on what we're focused on. But yeah, I would encourage people who are like dead set on being engineers. That's totally cool, but like exploring those skills of like, oh, what it is to actually put on a demo for the community, what it is to actually talk to the community, reach out to the community, that kind of thing. Just explore it a little bit. You never know if you might like it or not. I'm definitely looking to like go reach out to a bunch of engineers on our team and seeing how I could leverage their skill set on like streams and events that I'll be pulling off and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a different skill set and something kind of relatively new when you think of like tech as a whole, like tech jobs as for however long they've been around. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And good luck with it, Gwen. I think, no, it's cool. It's cool to hear your journey. So, where you came from that cloud engineer position to move into some content creation and doing the YouTube, and now you got started with that, doing the fantastic work that you did with the 100 Days of Cloud community, like we said earlier on, and now, shifting through doing the content creation that you were doing for free, but now actually getting paid to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, what's there not to like about that? But then actually taking that a step further and working for a company that, like you say, is the company. It sounds like you've just gone down your career journey and ticked all of these boxes on the way through, which is really great to hear. To be honest, it's a great kind of story to let people know, really what this has come from what I can see. Just turning to the community, all of these things have kind of happened. I'm guessing, I don't know, you tell me, Gwen, is it, do you attribute all of this career that you've had from being that cloud engineer to turn into the community a bit more, or do you think there was more to it than that?
I think it's a big part for sure. I like to think of it, it's like 25% my skill set and putting myself out there, and anything I guess I was fully in control, then 25% what the community has put back into me and have helped me and shared my stuff and encouraged and given feedback, like whether that be negative or positive, but constructive. And then 50% luck.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of times in my career when I look back, especially early on, where one thing went different and everything would have gone like, different direction, things like that, of course. I would also like to say, like, as much as I like, I guess, highlight the move from like cloud engineering to like ending up at Microsoft and like being my dream company, dream role, and that kind of things. Like, what we don't see and what I didn't share, which I regret, is, before all that, like I started in tech as like a retail, like fixing iPhones, and that was 6 years ago. And there was like so many rejections, so many very condescending team members back then. Moving into like a help desk role, again, people being just like, because as you work your way up and you work through these jobs that you don't necessarily have to do, but you don't want to do, but you have to get them done to like sort of build your skill set and that kinds of things. Like, let's not like forget that. Yeah, it looks amazing and it's great to highlight. Social media is very much your highlight reel. I also don't want to like give people the idea of like, oh, like you could sort of like start from like at there, like we have to work our way up. And
I know what you mean.
people are struggling, and I get messages like this often, like, hey, I really want to like get started, and I try to keep that time that I was going through that, where I was going to like rejection after rejection. It's funny. I just had we had an episode talking about interviews, and I was just remembering how I once like applied to a job, and I was so excited when I got a call back, and the person was like, "Hey, I'm calling you from you applied to this job," and like right then I got like super excited, like, "Oh, I might actually get an interview." And that person was from HR, and they were just calling to really just criticize my resume as how it was terrible. And they just went on the phone for like 20 minutes telling me like, "You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this." I guess it was feedback, like it probably helps as I went and I fixed my resume, but it was like there's a lot of heartbreaks to actually like moving up and that struggle, and I want to make sure everyone knows that we all go through it, and it does get better if as long as we like trust ourselves, lean into community, and keep learning and keep upskilling.
No, hugely valid point, Gwen. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's right to point it out, because at the end of the day, I think the only time that you fail is when you stop trying. I think, if you just, everybody gets those rejections, throughout their career in life, not just for work, in many aspects to life. You're rejected at times. That can be a struggle for you as an individual, I guess. But it's just that just stand up, move forward, just keep moving forward, I guess. And take on if it is constructive, and also learn. I think in my experience is learn when to know that any criticism that you're getting is not justified, and it's just coming from a place of malice potentially, because unfortunately there is that out there as well. But
there's a lot of that on the internet, especially when you start putting yourself out there. People will criticize you for whatever reason they can. Like for me, it's like, "Oh, your voice is so deep," or "Why do you wear hats? Why do you wear jewelry?" Really? things like that, really. Every now and then there'll be a constructive criticism where it's like, "Oh, your audio is too low," or maybe your video is too bright, or the screen, like the text size was too small, things like that. But I've become sort of like, I kind of ignore all of it now, right?
But I think that is, do you find that that's a skill in itself? I suppose if you are putting yourself out there doing this kind of work anyway, or this content creation community, to a certain regard, you whether you like it or not, you're going to attract something. Hopefully that something is positive. But I suppose if you're doing it this way, then expect to potentially get the negative side. And I guess what I was trying to say there is learn to understand, learn who you are, to know that if there is some constructive criticism, that you agree, you can take it on board, you can look to change that, whatever it may be, or actually, no, that's just come straight from a place of untruth. Somebody that's jealous of where you're going, or somebody that's just had a bad day and is taking it out on you in a social media comment or something. But I think that's also a good skill to kind of be able to, and that's not always easy for people, I guess. Is it dependent on your personality? But almost like learn to just have that thick skin and block a lot of it away and just put it into that category, I suppose.
It sucks that that's like a kind of like a default or like a given. If you're getting into this, you have to expect that, and I don't, I mean, I would be lying to say if like negative comments didn't affect me now. Like I try to ignore them as much as I can. But it's always going to be like that. That one bad thing that's said, it will be highlighted over the 100 good comments that you get, right? Absolutely. That bad thing will stick in your brain. And, I guess the advice there is to just make sure you have people around you or something around you that helps you, remind you of who you are. And also, the majority of people are great out there. The majority of the community is fantastic out there, super supportive. There's people like you who, you're constantly reaching out to, checking in on people and make sure people are doing well and things like that. But like those one out of like 100 people, you have one that's just terrible, and that one terrible person sticks out. It's like the loudest, right?
Yeah, that's the one that takes you down. And I know. And don't get me wrong. I think we all get it. And like I say, it's not necessarily associated with doing, community videos or anything like that. It can be at any point, can't it? I suppose
just the internet in general.
Oh, the internet is a bad place to be. Don't go there. But I mean, Gwen, this is, it's been a great conversation now, and I wanted to quickly touch on some of the other bits and pieces you've got going on before we call it. So, things like, we mentioned Rishab, we mentioned Antonio earlier on. From the 100 Days of Cloud, you're working with those guys now on a new podcast. I mean, do you want to tell us a little bit about that, how it's going, what you're up to?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Rishab and Antonio are people who I met alongside helping build 100 Days of Cloud, and I actually took a step back from 100 Days of Cloud and sort of removed myself from the core team back when I joined A Cloud Guru because I realized like I think I've always been good at not spreading myself too thin because I knew if I had to like help maintain that community and build that community, also like starting a new job, also maintaining my own platforms and things like that, we're gonna be like it's just gonna be too much for me. So I was very proud with the work that I had done there and like the relationships that I had built there. And I said, all right, this is where I kind of like sign off here. But Antonio and Rishab from that project, like we've just always been close, whether it be like playing video games together or just like talking about like different tech things or like maybe nothing tech related at all. Like we would just have the back and forth often. And especially Rishab has been someone that I have had conversations about like career, personal life, and like got to meet more and like in depth and like we're actually friends outside of like this tech stuff, right? So I wanted to have something or a show or something that I could sort of go to weekly and just chat with my friends. That's it. No expectations, nothing else. Like if we can talk about like what we do, we all work in the cloud space and what projects we're building, that kind of stuff, but also just our life. We'll just chat, like something that had no metrics attached to it, no topics attached to it, no expectations, just friends hanging out. And like I couldn't have picked two better people to have done it because they're my friends, right? Whenever I sort of think of building things, I'm always going to go to the people that I trust and the people that I know are willing to put in the work because don't get me wrong, like this content, it's great to put out there, but it's a lot of work. I'm sure you're very familiar with like, being, it's easy to put out one video a week, like one video, you did a video, it's out there. It's easy to put out one episode, but it's hard to do that for years. It's hard to do that over every single week because you got your life going on, you got your job going on, things like that. So I knew I wanted to be able to split the responsibility amongst people that were actually going to put in the work and put in as much, passion and, just their skill into it. So, and we've talked about sort of like reflecting on our careers, interview experiences, our favorite tech stacks. Our most recent episode that was released today, we were talking about projects that we've built at work. And we have like a bunch of other ideas that we're planning on, and it's great. It's like, it's organic how it comes about. And it's also cool because, a lot of the like video editing and things like that, Antonio's taking care of, and that's his area that he's wanted to explore. And, we all said, hey, give it a try. This is something that you can try it out with. Right. Rishab is also doing like the audio editing and sort of creating more social media clips. And that's something that he's wanted to try out as well. And he's taking care of that. I very much wanted it to be a show where we all try out new things, but since we have our sort of like friends around us, like we're not worried to fail because we're all in it together, kind of thing. And it's just like us talking whatever for an hour each week, and we hope to build more around it. But for now, it's the podcast, and we'll see what comes out of it. But yeah, it's a nice outlet to have.
Oh, it's a cool way that you describe it as well. I mean, and so that's the Cloud Code Life, and it is Cloud Code Life on Twitter, isn't it? So people can find it if they want to go and sign up. I'll put the links in the associated in the text for this video as well, so people can find it. But Gwen, I mean, to finish things off, then, I mean, it's been a fantastic chat. Like I said to you at the start, you and I don't mean this lightly, and I don't tell everybody that they're inspirational, but you did it for me when I started my career. So whether you realize it or not at the time, the stuff that you were doing, and I think that's what inspired me to realize. Sometimes when you do put things out into the community, you don't know who that's going to affect or how that's going to positively impact somebody else. So I thank you for that, because it was your video that hooked me into getting started with doing this kind of stuff. So whether you realize it or not, maybe you're probably thinking, I probably shouldn't have done that then. God, it's Jonnychipz is flying about the internet. But no, I mean, to finish things off, and I end with this kind of question for the majority of the guests I have on the show is where are we going in technology? So it's a big open-ended question as to what does the future look like from your perspective, Gwen?
Goodness, that is a big question. Let me just first say, like, I'm very glad that you're doing this. And, I also like that you reach out to people who aren't like your typical at one point there was this time in, I guess, the Azure content creation space where it felt like it was just the same people going on their shows, and like, this week I'll do your show, next week you'll go on mine, and that kind of like that, just like not reaching out to more.
I think it still happens, doesn't it? Yeah, it still happens, but I think it's just finding the people in the community. You know, it's
absolutely, and I appreciate that you're doing that, and you know, I know you'll still be doing that, and I encourage you to keep finding these new interesting voices in the space. But to answer your question, where are we going? I think the serverless rage, as much as I've been mentioning it this whole episode, I think that's still not at its prime. And I think there's still so much exploring around there. Like, I'm very focused on like a serverless full stack, serverless database, serverless like backend in general kind of thing. Okay. Obviously like crypto and this whole not necessarily crypto, but blockchain development, I think is and like this Web3 development is also very, very interesting. I want to stay away from talking about like crypto specifically, because there's like the amount of, I guess, movement and whether it be good or bad happening there is insane. But like this blockchain and decentralized applications is very interesting as well. Absolutely. I think also the developments in DevOps in terms of like containers and like the popularity of Kubernetes and things like that is also a space that you may want to be not very aware, but at least aware, and like get your hands and dip your toes into that as well. Yeah, man, there's like so many different, it's like not just one thing, but like a whole bunch of areas like pushing forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say serverless. Serverless is here. It's been here, and I think it's here to stay for a while at least.
No, that's cool, Gwen. I think it's I like to leave it open ended just to see people's take on where the vision is for the future, and it's cool. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer to that. Absolutely, it's your own opinion there and where we're going. So there's some cool little areas there you pointed out as well for people to kind of dip into. Blockchain and Web 3.0 and serverless, of course. Yeah. So Gwen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for giving up your time today to come on. I really genuinely mean that, and obviously on a personal note, I meant everything I said. Thanks so much for being the inspiration for me to begin. Wishing you all the best of luck now with the career that you're going to have at Microsoft. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely successful, as I got no doubts with that from seeing what you've been up to for the last year. So, but yeah, we'll call it there. Thanks for being an awesome guest, Gwen.
Thank you for the invite.
Anytime. We'll catch you soon.
All right. See y'all.